This is Thrive Perspectives, an ever-growing discussion about the issues and ideas that shape our lives, with your guide, Dr. Matthew Jacoby.
Welcome, listeners, to this episode of Thrive Perspectives. I'm your host, Stu. Everybody's talking about justice right now. Social justice, racial justice, climate justice. Your feed is full of call-outs, hashtags, and hot takes. Modern social justice theory tells you the world is a battlefield of oppressed versus oppressors, where morality is measured by where you sit on the grid of race, gender, or sexuality. It gives you a language of systems, privilege, microaggressions, and a mission: dismantle power. But there's an older, sharper word sitting on the table: justice in the Bible. Not just be nice, not a thin God loves everybody, but a thick, demanding vision where God himself defines right and wrong, defends the poor, confronts the powerful, and calls everyone to account. A justice that sees sin deeper than systems, grace deeper than guilt, and hope bigger than the latest revolution. Let's join Matt and Connell in this two-part episode as we ask, is the Bible's justice too small for our moment? Or is our moment too small for the Bible's justice? Good morning, Connell. Good morning, Matt.
Morning, Stu.
Morning.
And Connell.
Yes. And Matt.
Good. Yeah.
And
we're all here.
Are we
all
here?
here.
Hi, Stu.
President
Yeah.
accounted.
We're here. I think we're here.
And we're going to try and make some sense, aren't we? Out of a very complex
I think try is a
subject.
really good word there, Matt. Welcome, listeners. Great to have you with us for Thrive Perspectives. And today we are going to be chatting through a topic, justice. And that you might think sounds really simple, but we're going to do our best to make you understand how complex it is over the
That's right.
3 hours.
Well, it's become complex.
Yes,
And,
it has.
today when people think about justice, it tends to be associated with contemporary social justice theory, which is an enormously complex area. And so we do want to address that, but we want to do so in the light of a biblical view of justice and somewhat understand where the contrast is, because it's become very complex, so much so that even Christians can get drawn into thinking in ways that align with contemporary social justice theory. It's not all wrong, but there are some problems with that. That can get drawn in ways that end up contradicting a biblical view of justice. So I want to build this from the
worth saying
from the bottom.
too is that most people wouldn't even know there is a social justice theory.
Well,
I wouldn't
I
have known about it until I.
Yeah, but everyone knows about cancel culture and words like woke and these sorts of things that float around. And what we tend to do is we tend to act in a reactionary way, or we just dismiss it, or we just uncritically adopt it because it pervades just about everything. It's in film, all forms of popular media and television. It's all over YouTube. It's all over reels, and it's the little fragments that we get that pervade everything. So,
but I think a lot of people wouldn't know that there is.
Yeah, well, that's part of what we want to
theory.
actually.
We just think it's part
today.
of modern culture or politics or whatever,
or even progress.
And I have my view, and you have your view, and so on. But I don't think a lot of people would have thought about actually formalizing it in their own mind. There's actually a social justice theory that we can tie a lot of this stuff into, which is probably useful because if we can identify it, we can orientate ourselves towards some sort of Christian worldview disposition towards.
And you're right, it is useful, the fact that it is actually grounded in a theory. Now, I mean, there are theories really, but there are unifying principles, and we're going to trace that. So yes, while most people only get the little fragments, it is very useful to understand what those fragments are rooted in, what is the worldview that they're rooted in. I think this is really important for understanding that, so that we don't get drawn into the wrong framework, the wrong way of thinking overall. Part of even this whole, even this whole podcast really is about trying to think biblically.
Yes.
Trying to adopt a biblical perspective, right? And recognizing in our culture that there are perspectives that run counter to the biblical perspectives that we can adopt without really even knowing or realizing, because, we're social creatures and we do tend to think with a communal brain. brain because, we share language, we share the cultural forms. There are no real individual thinkers. We really do think with a communal brain because we share language and we share cultural forms. And so we want to critique that communal brain so we can think with the right kind of communal brain, which is the church, right? The body of Christ, with Christ as the head.
And I think for me, as I've kind of read through some of this social justice theory stuff, I've realized how much I've wanted to try to treat the symptoms instead of actually going back to, hang on, what's the root cause of the problem? And so you read some of the stuff and it goes, well, that makes sense, but only if you don't look at it from a biblical worldview and look at, well, how did we get here?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, and the situation is such that it could easily cause Christians just to throw up their hands and put their head in the sand, or hide behind the wall. It's something that we've abundantly critiqued over the episodes of this podcast is that fortress mentality. We're now in a situation of cross-cultural communication as the church sharing our message in our culture. We have completely different frameworks, but like all missionaries do in cross-cultural mission is that they seek to understand the culture so that they don't unnecessarily offend the cultural sensibilities. I mean, the gospel has enough offense in it already, and we shouldn't drain it of that offense, but we shouldn't add unnecessary offense. And so it's important that we understand the culture that we're in and not just despair and withdraw.
That's an interesting kind of follow-on, like from the last episode, because we were talking about it more as an international sense, like going into other cultures and doing that missional kind of work and having to understand the culture. One way to frame today is we're all on mission in our own culture as well, and maybe we better get better at understanding
our culture,
our own culture, for exactly the same reasons as we talked about last.
That's good.
That's good. So we're going to, first of all, define justice. I want to build a concept of justice from a biblical point of view. Now, justice becomes an issue, of course, because of the fall. There was in a sense, no need for justice in a perfect world. Because,
justice is right and wrong.
Yeah, because everything was rightly ordered.
Yes.
And I think this idea of order and chaos is an important part of this, everything in the right order, okay? And that order is God's order. So God creates the world and he establishes a certain order. And that order includes the fact that he is God, he is the creator, and human beings are his children. And human beings are to rule over the earth in a way that respects it as God's creation and as God's gift. And that looks like stewardship and so forth. And so you have this perfect sort of picture of human beings in a relationship of a true family of God's children. And I think from this, we could, if we're to draw a sense of justice from this, because justice is essentially an endeavor to recover that. A good definition would be giving what is due to whom it is due. So giving our ultimate worship and allegiance to God is honoring God. Perhaps the word honor there is a useful word. We honor God first. And in the light of that, because all people are God's children, therefore we honor people as sacred. All human beings are sacred image bearers. And also, let's add creation to that as well. And creation is the gift of God, right? Creation is the space. It has this beautiful sacramental significance. It's God's gift to us, and we're to respect it because it conveys the glory of God to us. And so it's given to us to enjoy, to steward and enjoy this together as part of our worship of God. So this is what things being in the right, everything in the right place looks like. And in its context, this is set off against, in its historical context, in the ancient world, all societies, we've said this, were caste systems. And all societies essentially saw in the world a natural inequality. And they worked with that natural inequality because they saw, well, some people are stronger than others. And so, Genesis is written against the backdrop of that and correcting that and saying, no, all human beings are equal as children of God. And so that becomes the basis for a statement of justice in contrast to the nations around them. It's important that Genesis has a context.
Yes.
And its context is caste societies, right? So where only kings were seen as being children of God and image bearers of God. So what Genesis is doing is democratizing that and saying we're all sacred image bearers. So that means the honor that you give to kings, you need to give to every single human being. Wowzers, that's very, very significant. But that's in the light that you give your primary honor to God. So that's the first thing. Now, to understand what justice then looks like, it's also important from a biblical point of view. It's also important to understand where things went wrong, right? Because a lot of social justice theory is based on analysis of how things are wrong with the world. But the Bible tells a story of the fall, and it describes human beings rebelling against God, and that becomes the core of where things went wrong. It's actually our rebellion against God. It's one of the best definitions of sin, I think, is a failure to give to God what is due to Him. We owe everything to God, and it's the failure to give ourselves, our worship, our all to God that is the essence of sin.
It just sort of, I kind of think with justice and addressing what's gone wrong and so on, it does beg the question then of what is wrong. Wrong becomes something to do with then what am I basing that on? If we base it on the Bible and God and His reference point, then in social justice theory outside of a biblical worldview, what have they got to base it on? If justice is like restoring things back to how they are meant to be, then what's the reference point?
And this is part of the problem. And I'll build a picture.
Okay.
Like what does social justice theory look like when you don't have that basis?
So just before you move from there, I just want to say something that becomes very apparent to me. The first sin was deciding that we want to decide what's right
that's a good point.
and what's wrong.
Yeah.
We want to decide what justice is, because until there's a right and a wrong, or good and evil, knowledge of good and evil, there is no need, in a sense.
That's right.
For
You're
justice.
referring to the tree, eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, which symbolizes the prerogative. It's taking the prerogative to decide for ourselves what is right. Okay. And that's an interesting and I think very significant point about the nature of sin is actually us deciding that we're going to choose what's right and wrong. So what essentially you get in Genesis is things going from perfect order to that being inverted. You get chaos. It's a disordering of God's order, and that essentially is the essence of evil. Everything is good, but when good things are disordered, that's when you get evil. And part of that disorder, we would say, is distributed in a way that doesn't reflect the honor that is due to human beings. And we know that when God brought His people into the land, which was to act as a kind of new Eden, one of the important principles there, and the law, the law of Moses is remarkable for its statements of justice, is that was to be a shared space, and there are all of these laws designed to prevent all of the resources ending
in one place,
ending up in one space. That's not necessarily a recipe for saying, right, we're going to all become communists, right? Because there's problems with that, because we've got to face the realities of human nature. We've got to be realistic now about human nature when we come to solutions. But the point is that there were all of these things built into the systems of ancient Israel. Things like the cancellation of debts and the redistribution of property back to the original share, because there was this sense that the land is God's land, right? So the idea in that God was getting across to them is no one is entitled, right? There's no entitlement. Now, in a culture of entitlement, that's a very important point. What people have is responsibility. You have responsibility for each other, and you have a responsibility for ensuring that everyone gets to enjoy the gifts of God. Because remember, if all of creation has this sacramental significance, and what I mean by sacramental significance, it means it's a gift from God. We refer to the Lord's Supper as a sacrament.
Yep.
So when I say something has sacramental significance, it means it's something to be received as a gift that belongs within the context of the relationship, right? If I give you a gift, there's a sort of three-dimensional significance with the gift. The value isn't just in the thing itself. It's in the fact that I've given it to you. Yeah. It's in the gesture, right? So we are to receive all of the good things in this world as having this sacramental significance. We receive it as from God, right?
Yeah.
Now, because it's a gift, it means that no one deserves it. It's something that God wills to give to all people as His children, right? It's given in love, and God's love is towards all of his children. So the idea that we earn it or that it's warranted or that I'm entitled to it goes right against the idea that it's actually a gift, right? So this is very important when we think about material inequality and things like this, that we ground it in that idea.
Can I just make one more point too about your comment about when they went into the Promised Land and the New Eden concept? Obviously, it was primarily an agricultural, farming-driven community.
Yeah.
So the understanding was, I don't own the land.
Yeah.
I'm stewarding it.
Yeah.
And then there'll come a time where I give it back to the pool and someone else might get to steward it.
Yeah.
And so there's a sense of, I don't own it.
Yeah, because it's a gift.
I've got a responsibility to look after it. Yeah.
So there's this continual sense, it's a gift. I have given you this land. And so if someone hoards a whole section of it, then you are taking the gift that I have given
to everyone. You're taking it for yourself.
You're taking it for yourself. That's the idea behind that. Now, again, this is not a formula for a political solution right now. Remember, Israel was a sign. They are embodying theological principles. And so we're to draw our principles of justice from this. And so what this means is that a Christian notion of justice is going to begin not with entitlement, right? Because if the whole world is a gift, then by definition, we're not entitled to it. And that is doubly the case with us having sinned, right? I mean, it was already the case in creation. I mean, it was already a gift of God to his children. Now it's doubly a gift, one that definitely isn't warranted. No one deserves anything from God. And yet God graces us. And the charisma, the Greek word charisma, it's translated gift or grace, and grace is undeserved. So a Christian worldview will see everything that is good as a gift, which gets rid of notions of entitlement, and it highlights our responsibility for stewarding the gifts, because now, having received a gift, we are now responsible to steward that gift. Now,
just to emphasize that in a different way, because a lot of people would describe, the Jubilee, the way it's described in the Old Testament, as it's almost like communism, like we don't own anything, we give it all back into the pool. And you said, well, it's not like communism. People might claim it as that because we're looking at it through like a left and a right lens. But I think if you haven't got the biblical worldview, it's either mine or it belongs to the government. They're the only really two actors. And so we're either defensive of it, I've got it, it belongs to me, I've earned it. If I give it to someone, then they should just be grateful that I've shared them a little bit of my wealth, but, that just makes me a good person. Or as opposed to the other side is it's the government's and the government takes it and redistributes it, which is more like communism. But I think in the biblical worldview, there's a third actor that we can bring onto the scene, if you like, which is God. It doesn't belong to the government. It doesn't belong to you. It belongs to God.
Yeah.
And I think when you understand it in those terms, it completely changes it. It changes my responsibility as someone who's living under God, and it changes my lens in terms of how I view social justice.
Yeah, that's a good point, because those do tend to be the options. And I think we need to remember, the Old Testament Israel was a theocracy. It's ultimately because they are recognizing that everything is a gift of God. And so that shapes everything, really. That shapes the whole sense of justice flows from that, flows from that principle. That's an important sort of basis. Now, just to address entitlement, it's difficult for us to say that we're entitled to anything, but certainly we're commanded to love each other, which we could say that I'm entitled to be loved by you, but I think that's tricky. I think that's tricky. It's not quite how love works, because in the same way as, particularly in the light of the fall, the expression of God's love for us becomes grace. Okay,
yeah. So we're not entitled to be loved by God.
That's right.
So
we're
the
not
same
entitled.
thing flows the other way.
Same thing flows the other way, right?
Yep.
So it's a situation where it's not that I'm entitled to be loved by you, but because God so loved the world and sacrificed himself in Jesus Christ, that he paid the price for our guilt and gave us this undeserved favor, this grace. Therefore, that changes everything, right?
Yes.
Now, because God did that. It's because God did that.
It flows from
now,
that.
it's actually unjust for me not to do that, right? But I can't say, I'm entitled to be loved by you. It's your responsibility under God to give grace as you have received grace. But the nature of it is that it has to be given. I remember my mum telling me that when she was at boarding school, they had this rule around the table. She went to a boarding school at Mount Macedon called Clyde, which is actually the school that the Picnic and Hanging Rock is based.
Oh, wow.
Based anyway, that's whatever. So,
Next episode, we'll be on. Yeah.
That's right. Unimportant detail there.
Yeah.
But they would sit around a table and they weren't allowed to ask for anything. They had to wait
Until it was offered.
until it was offered.
Wow.
So if you wanted salt, you couldn't ask for the salt.
Right.
So what I think it's a great
it
idea.
creates a culture where
So it
people are
created a
thinking
culture where
about everyone else.
Everyone's thinking about each other. And that was the idea, that if I'm thinking, I haven't got this, like you have to actually pay attention to other people's needs, and you have to be part of then creating a culture where people do that. Otherwise, you don't get it either.
Or you smuggle your own salt in. That's all I'm thinking about.
That was when Matt was at boarding school. This is his mum.
Thanks for destroying my picture. I love that picture because I think it is,
Yeah, wow.
and it's not that we can't ask, but I love the idea of that culture. It's not that you need to give this to me. Like I'm entitled, I'm entitled to this. No, it's actually creating a culture of responsibility for one another.
So the responsibility, yeah, exactly. It's responsibility that rests with me to look out for you and you to look out for me, not you to expect it to come from me.
Yeah, that's right.
There's also something else similar to that I was reading about. There was some like complexity of ideas around then love. We view love as being like, well, God requires us to love and, we're commanded to love one another and so on. And then if you're expected to do that, is it really love? It's like, because you're only then doing it, because I have to love my neighbor, I better.
Which actually isn't love.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so you get tangled up in all of this. And the point that's made is, look, it's not as simple as that. We love because God loved us, and it's through the relationship that we have with him that we love people because we do love people. We're not loving people just because we're told we have to love them in sort of inverted commas. We do it because we actually do, because we've got a right relationship with God and we know him and he's restoring us, and it flows out of, it's who we become. So,
and I think that's completely measured by the level of understanding of how much grace we've received out of what's been given to us. When you really understand that, it's so much easier to give it.
So if I can just go back to again describing how things went wrong and where they went wrong, because I think this is again important for understanding and defining justice. Basically what happens when human beings reject God is that there's a fundamental loss of identity, because identity is formed relationally. This flows from a biblical view of human beings and what our identity is. So our identity fundamentally is relational, which means that I'm fundamentally a child of God. Like we're not independent units in a sense. Like the Bible affirms individuality, but not individualism. Individualism is where you get these sort of isolated individuals, but actually we're all connected. And our identity, it is in our interconnectedness. And the most important connection is with God, right? So, I'm a child of God, but I'm also a father and I'm a husband and I'm and my sense of identity comes relationally, right? This is important because that's the way that it's meant to be. Like we're meant to be connected with each other in a family, and we're meant to be connected with God, and our identity is meant to flow from that. But think what happens when you cut yourself off from God, then you have this identity vacuum, and your identity, it's an impossibility. It's not, you're still going to need to get your identity relationally, right?
Yeah.
So your identity is going to come from your tribe, your people, your clan, and
your position in that.
And it's going to come comparatively to others now.
Yes.
So whereas you drew your identity from your relationship of connectedness, with God first and with your human family, now the only way you can get a sense of identity is in the way that you are different to the other, to the other people. And so what now gets emphasized is not the way in which we're alike, but the way in which we differ, right? And so you're going to start highlighting differences and ways in which I'm better than you. And so this is where you get this kind of fragmentation, and it becomes comparative. I'm better, I'm stronger. And so you get this power struggle. And power is important here because we have this is an important concept as well as we talk about justice.
So now we're up to Cain and Abel.
Yeah, now we're up to
Essentially.
Cain and Abel. That's right. And that, I think, is a story that is indicative. This is the first generation after the fall. And what do we get? We get a struggle. And we get a struggle. It's like a struggle for recognition.
Significance.
Yeah, and for significance. Like it's jealousy. It's you against me. You get this fragmentation of brothers. And that story is saying something really profound, theologically profound about now the human situation. So that fragmentation is a big part of that. And power now is about my power over you, essentially. Power is something, it's like it's a limited resource that in a sense is caught up with this identity thing, how much power I have compared to you. Okay. Now think about that in contrast to where we were when, as created as children of God, it was given to us to rule. We wield divine power, which is given to us by grace, right? It's like it's imparted to us to empower us to do God's will, right? And to enjoy God in creation and amongst each other, right? It's to be stewarded with this responsibility that we have for creation and we have for each other. What happens when we pull away from God is that what we have is human capacity in its varying degrees, right? Because this is the thing, we're all different. And so we highlight those differences and then you get this competition. And this is in essentially how you get within societies, you get caste systems, those with lots of power and lots of agency and those with none. But arguably, even those with lots of power and lots of agency are still oppressed in a sense by the whole scenario. And then between, say, tribal groups or societies, you get this competition as well. So you get factionalism, tribalism, you get, wars between people groups, nations, and so forth, and the rest is history. So that's a kind of...
And we'll wrap it up then.
Yeah, we'll wrap it up there. Okay. So I think, again, power is about my power. You have all the power and I need to take power from you because
that's where your significance is.
That's where your significance is. That's where your identity lies. And also that your power is a limited resource.
And I have to protect it.
Yeah.
Because I'm protecting my identity.
That's right.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you've got to protect that. So just think of that in contrast with where we originally were. In the original, where humanity was, with power as a gift, unlimited resource. It's a huge difference. Okay. So now let's just step from that. I've just described a biblical worldview, right? Of what original goodness, what was originally good and right. And a big part of this, actually, all theories of justice, I should say, are based on a vision of what is ultimately good. In fact, all ethics is based on a vision of what the ultimate good is. This is an important point to make, actually. And what you think the ultimate good is based in the story of reality that you live in, essentially. So we live in a story in which God created the world and ordered in a certain way and created us in his image. So the ultimate good for human beings is to be holy. We are sacred space, right? It is to be in that position as a child of God, living as a child of God, a sacred child of God in perfect relationship with God. That's the ultimate good.
Yeah. And I just want to say, when we use the word story, we're not saying you can pick your story.
Thank you. Yep.
We're talking about context, the context in which you think about everything moving forward, in a sense. Because I think when we hear the word story, we think, oh, well, they've got their story and we've got our story. And you go with what your story is.
Yeah, there's one reality.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. There's one reality, and we are telling a story of reality that we believe is the truth. Now, if you don't have that story, what do you have? Okay, so what is going to be your ultimate good? If you reject the biblical story and you just have a naturalistic story. So there's just this, and there is natural inequality and limited resources, right? Limited power. You're basically having to affirm what is the case. This is just the case, and it is actually struggle. It's just constant struggle for power. It's a power struggle.
But power struggle, and the other side of the coin is identity struggle, which is
an identity struggle. That's right.
So you got those two things.
Yeah.
Sort of
and remember, we're not individualizing this, and there is a struggle for power within groups. We'll kind of recognize that. But on a broad scale, it's the struggle between groups as well. Okay, so this is what you have, and this is what you have to start with. Now, this is exactly where Karl Marx begins when he writes his Communist Manifesto and The Capital and his major works. And it's to Marx that we go for the roots, not the deepest roots, but essentially the roots of social justice theory. Now, again, when people hear that, just try to put aside communism, because that's not necessarily what Marx envisaged. I don't like what Marx envisaged because there's a fundamental difference of worldview. I mean, you couldn't get a more different worldview to the Christian worldview than Marx's worldview, because it's completely materialistic, right? There is no God for Marx. And so you end up just with this. You end up with this struggle between groups. And what he sees is that struggle between groups within societies, there's still groups, but they're arranged hierarchically. So basically everything is struggle between groups, and those groups inevitably in societies are arranged hierarchically. And so you get class struggle becomes the key. And that is the base reality. Because remember, I said your vision of the ultimate good is based in the story of reality that you tell. And he tells a story, a materialistic story, where there's just a struggle, limited resource, and it's a struggle for power and recognition.
He sees the struggle. He sees the symptoms of it. He's correct in identifying the symptoms.
That's right. And he sees that the struggle for recognition is a big one in Marx as well. The struggle for identity. All of these elements, okay? So, and that for him is the base reality, is everything is class struggle, including the way that we think, right? Because he will argue, he does argue, that the dominant modes of thinking in any given society are the modes of thinking of the most powerful class. So they dominate what I've called the communal brain, in a sense, that even affects those at the bottom, and it keeps those at the bottom, right? Now, I'm describing Marx now, so I'm just going to... This is not the Christian worldview. So basically...
But it's still a reality, though.
And there is... And I think, yes, I think there is validity to this.
The communism part comes in then to the application of the
it's solution. Like, what's the solution?
Yeah.
And this is the thing with a lot of... As we talk about Marxism, and as we're going to go on and talk about critical theory, and particularly when we get onto critical theory, man, like a critical theory is a sort of neo-Marxist movement in the early 20th century. And the two books of the two critical theorists that I read, Adorno and Horkheimer, I thought, this is brilliant Christian apologetics. like for reasons that I mean, they're not Christians, but they provide critical tools for critiquing dominant modes of thought that's undeniably valid, right? So there are lots of elements of the critique that are valid. It's when you get to solutions, right? It's easy to see that there's a problem. But
it's how you fix it.
It's how you fix it.
But doesn't this tie back a little bit? Without God, you've either got the government or you've got the individual. Yeah. And the solutions, therefore, once you push the biblical worldview aside, you either solve it through government, which would be more of the communist approach. Well, in order to do that, we've got to dismantle all the power structures, redistribute wealth. The government takes ownership of. If you go to the other side,
the government, as in inverted commas, the people. You know?
That's right. And then if you go to the other side of the political spectrum, it's all mine, and then I'm entitled to. So most people got to operate in one of those domains. And I think as Christians, then this is what you've got to be aware of it, is you kind of then see the Christian worldview as well through those two, one of those two lenses.
And what can happen is that Christians reject one and just go to the other one.
Yeah. Well, they don't perceive the third option.
Because it's neither of those actually.
There's a third leg to the
neither
stool.
Communism or liberalism are actually the ultimate solution. And I think this is important because the movement towards a solution has to be based on a kind of root diagnosis of the problem. Like, it's easy to see the symptoms of the problem. And essentially, this is what Marx and this is what the critical, the Frankfurt School that we're going to talk about, the critical theorists in the 20th century, they're going to see symptoms, which is valid. We see this happening, we see that happening, and we see oppression here, and we see totalitarianism here, all this sort of stuff. It's just like, okay, that's good. But the diagnosis depends on the story that you're embedding that in, right? And that's going to affect the solution because they're going to want to change the story, like they're going to want to sort of change the trajectory of the story. So that becomes a key part of that.
And if you take it to our culture now, you might take things like the identity politics that we see at play in our modern culture. From what you've just said about power and identity, when you remove the biblical worldview, that's what we're left with. It's a story that revolves around power and identity. Who has the power and who's oppressing who? And therefore, all of your justice then works on trying to fix that problem.
That's right.
But this is where the biblical worldview comes in. And that my concern is that I think as Christians, we don't adopt the Christian worldview. We adopt the power, identity, political lens that we have in our culture now, and we try to work from within that.
Yeah.
When I think what we're trying to say is there's another option for us as Christians.
Although let's be realistic about this, and I don't want to jump ahead too much, because we critique that the answer isn't just jumping from socialism to liberalism or from liberalism to socialism, but we do actually live in a world where they are actually where we have to choose.
It's the language of the culture almost.
But we do need to we need to understand that at best those solutions are like palliative care for the human condition. You know what I mean?
Like
it's not a solution. So yes, we have to choose: are we going big government or small government? And you can, but you need to see that neither actually is the ultimate solution.
So we operate within that system, but somehow we've got to bring that.
But we're seeding a completely different kingdom into this,
from
right? And it's that's right, and from the ground up, it's the yeast that's spreading through the dough, right? That's the important part of the task. Okay, so just let's go. So let's go back to Marx. let me just. So in Marx, you get this idea of class struggle that undermines. So all of history is class struggle. So basically, he sees that endemic in everything. He sees the ruling classes controlling not only the means of production in a society, but the ideas. They govern the way that people think, even. Okay, so they govern the language, they govern education and all of this sort of thing. And so those at the bottom are kept at the bottom because of the way that they think. It sort of keeps them down. This is where a big part of Marxism is re-education. You have to uproot ideas, and re-education programs are an important part of that. Okay, so when we get into the 20th century, this goes in a lot of different directions, and there's not a Marxism. There are lots of different Marxisms, and I'm not going to attempt to map this today. But one of the most influential is that of the Frankfurt School. It's kind of roughly sort of 1930s group in Germany. This becomes known as critical theory, and two key players in that were Adorno and Horkheimer, and their work is basically taking on a kind of Marxist critique, but I think in a much more sophisticated way. And they're focused on, particularly on like thought structures, ways of thinking that narrow reality down, or that discount certain other perspectives, and that creates a kind of intellectual totalitarianism. And this is where I actually found value in this, because their book, The Dialectic of Enlightenment, they're critiquing the Enlightenment tradition, right? I mean, we became so enamored with the scientific method, and the scientific method gave us this mastery over certain elements of nature. And so we decided that we're going to discount any knowledge that doesn't come through the scientific method. So we narrowed reality down basically to what could be handled through this scientific method. So this is like positivism and this idea. So
we did a few episodes on
we did.
Yeah, we did. That's right. So their critique of that, this is the sort of way of thinking that underlies, the atheism of people like Dawkins and Hitchens and others, and Daniel Dennett. And I mean, it's partly why they've been largely discredited, because that way of thinking was called out a long time ago. And it was actually the critical theorists that did this. Adorno and Horkheimer actually say Enlightenment is totalitarianism, right? They say, because you're narrowing reality down, saying this is the only thing you can call knowledge. This is the only thing that's real. It's like, who are you to who are you to say that is the only means of knowledge? Because their issue is that it's the scientists that will tell us what's ultimately true. Now, again, they're not inherently dismissing science. They're not anti-science. So they're not going with that whole, anti-science. But they're anti this approach that says that this is the only pathway to knowledge. I think as Christians, we'd have to say that's, again, it's they're recognizing the symptoms. They're recognizing problems.
What other pathway to knowledge did they claim?
I think they want, they...
Wasn't it lived experience largely?
Well, yeah, that comes a little later. From memory, they do talk a lot about other stories. Like they talk about mythology, actually. Mm-hmm. And they talk about other stories, not necessarily saying that the other stories are literally real, but
they inform our decisions. And
but there are other possible stories that need to be heard, and potentially even other ways of knowing. They're not necessarily, not actually offering a solution as such. They're just trying to release the grip,
keep the door open,
to keep the door open
beyond just purely scientific.
But you do end up with. This is the thing where this goes to, because, okay, they recognize a problem. So now what's the solution?
Yes.
Right. Now, without a biblical framework, the solution becomes a sort of anti-scientific determinism that my reality is my reality. And if science tells me that I'm a male, but I feel like a female, then my lived experience or what I feel to be true takes precedence over that. Or at least must be validated, at least, because I don't want to caricature this, but this is the danger. We're trying to sort of make things simple, but it's actually very complicated.
I think we can see it.
I'm going to admit to caricatures a little bit.
You can caricature it in the sense of defining the theory. There is a principle now in today that lived experience, it trumps any kind of scientific, or you can observe something to be true, but if someone's lived an experience that's different to that, you can't even challenge that. And therefore that becomes an identity. It gets retold in the power and oppressor and the oppressed and so on. So I think lived experience is another component of this kind of current naturalistic.
Yeah. And that, yes, that is where that goes. But if I can just build this, gradually. So critical theory is about what they focus on, diagnosing all the elements at which power structures are at work in society. Then we move forward. I'm skipping lots of bits here, but a really important player in this is Michel Foucault, the philosopher, probably in the height of his activity in about the 70s, and he takes a Marxist perspective. His focus is very much on the way that power is at work. He also blends in a sort of Nietzschean perspective, this idea that everything is about power, and that all human beings have this force at work in this will to power. And so he sort of combines the Marxist perspective with that, and he sees every societal relation as being power relations, even individual relationships are all power relationships. So it's not so much classes. He thinks that's too simplistic, that it's just class struggle. He sees that we all participate in these power struggles in lots of different ways. There are lots of different overlapping power dynamics in society. And the goal is for us to recognize that and to liberate ourselves. The goal really for Foucault is liberation, essentially, is emancipation, to use an even more charged word, right? We need to emancipate ourselves from where we've been overpowered. And so he talks about criminality. He talks about mental illness and these sorts of things. Who gets to say, for example, what mental illness is? And this you still see this today in debates around the DSM, the Diagnostic Manual for Psychology. What counts as abnormal psychology, because in order to diagnose abnormal psychology,
you have to decide what normal is.
You have to decide what normal is, right? Yeah. So that keeps shifting, right? So, people will say the boy that wants to be a girl, they'll say it's not a mental illness. That you get the kind of flows from Foucault because, he's questioning who gets to say where the line is
objective
of normal.
Truth. You're moving away from an objective truth.
Well, yeah, and that gets to that sort of, again, he's working with this reality that there's just this, right? And everything is these power dynamics. And basically, different groups are telling different stories. And at different times, we've told different stories of reality. And we can't get to reality behind our language and our stories. That's what he thinks. He's not denying that reality is reality. He's just saying that we can't access reality because can only access reality through our language. Our language forms a sort of conceptual grid, and our language forms conceptual systems that he calls discursive practices. And it's through these ways of talking about the world. So science is a discursive practice, right? It's a way of thinking about the world. And so there are different sort of ways of talking about the world, but none of them is privileged. They're all, we're not really getting to reality. And here's the thing, some ways of thinking about the world might dominate others. This is the thing, right? So there are ways of thinking that tell you that something is normal and not normal, okay? And so what he sees in his books on crime and on mental illness, he sees ways in which society has wanted to enforce conformity to a standard by, punishing those who don't keep to that standard or institutionalizing those who don't conform to the standard. So he sees these dynamics, at work everywhere. And this almost creates, I think, post-Foucault, this creates this, but almost like a paranoia about power dynamics, power dynamics and tools of oppression and forms of oppression, because he says we're all playing the game. We're all playing the game.
Well, you kind of have to if you're in the game. If you're on the field, you've kind of got to play the game.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And because this is his reality. And so this gets us to contemporary social justice theory, which is largely about uncovering power dynamics and creating paths to emancipation from those power dynamics.
To dismantle.
Yeah. And it does it within identity groups, but it's even more complicated because people can belong to different identity groups. If you're a black, disabled, female, add some other things, you belong to a number of different
you can probably find
identity
one
groups.
You can belong to somewhere.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
they would say we all belong to one.
Yeah, this is where it gets very. This is where contemporary social justice theory gets really, really complex, and this is when I say it gets really complex. Part of the complexity is that they are working with that.
Playing the game.
Says Foucault's worldview again, of that sort of game that's being played, but there's still this strong Judeo-Christian value system that's feeding into this. And this is something that Tom Holland recognizes, like, this idea of being the oppressed and the victim and the rights for the oppressed and all of this sort of stuff. This goes back to a biblical ethic. So to be the oppressed is in some ways, in a way, you have the moral high ground if you are the oppressed, right, as opposed to the oppressor. The
Even
Bible wouldn't put it like that.
That's exactly right.
Like that you have the moral high ground, but certainly God's concern is for the oppressed, right? So there's this, well, I'm the oppressed, and there's a kind of almost an identity that comes with that is almost, it's a kind of moral high ground sort of.
Well, it comes with entitlements then, in a way. Like if I can identify, there's almost, you see in society now, being part of the oppressed is a way to, maybe it's trying to anesthetize ourselves against all the other things that are going on in the world and in life and pressures of life, that the way that now maybe we deal with that is becoming the oppressed. So that then it kind of, in a way,
excuses us. It excuses us in a sense from our behaviour.
Yeah, or gives us a sense of entitlement to that. When I look at the sort of biblical worldview, because I think the oppressed and the oppressor has been now muddied what that even means. I kind of think of it more as the vulnerable, like the ones that don't have the power. That in a Christian worldview, if you have power, you've got to use your power to protect the vulnerable, rather than just who identifies as oppressed. But there are people that just lack power. And there's a sort of obligation on us more to focus on who's vulnerable in society, because then those people can be abused by the power structures and they haven't got the ability to seek out justice, I guess, for themselves. It's a different emphasis. Instead of trying to join the oppressed group, there is just a fundamental reality. It's the evidence is that there are people that are vulnerable that I think we're responsible for.
Yeah. So you have a situation where, just to summarize, because we could just muddy the waters here a lot. This is the bit where the waters do get muddy, and they get muddy because of the mix of worldviews. It's a moral instinct that is embedded in us, right? And it's a moral instinct that that's been seeded into because it fits reality. It sticks, right? It's like it's seeded into our culture, this instinct that the oppressed must be protected and that the needy and so forth. And we have this sense of, lack of power and lack of agency and all of these sorts of things. And it's a sound moral instinct. The problem is when you take that and you put that into a kind of materialistic, atheistic worldview, it becomes very, very problematic because you essentially take the moral intuition that favors the oppressed and sees the oppressed as having a right to sort of redress for that, and that wants to find a pathway of emancipation. This is when you get to the solution. What does emancipation actually look like? And this is where the solution just becomes more of from a Christian point of view, it bebecome more of the problem. Because essentially what you then get is you get entitlement and you get a lot of moral high horsing, like, I'm on the high moral ground here. No, I'm on the high moral. And from a biblical point of view, no one has the moral high ground. Like, Foucault is partly right that we're all participating in the structures that keep us oppressed, but not in the sense that he means it, right? We're all participating in different ways, right, in this problem, but in different ways, right? But if you're only going to recognize one kind of cluster of ways that have to do with, resources and power and things like that, then you've skewed the picture, and then you have a situation where one group feels, I guess, more morally entitled than another group. And so the Christian notion that all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God takes away the entitlement, which puts the emphasis on grace. And that message of grace, which is at the center of the good news, really becomes the true solution to that situation, because we're confronted with a situation where all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God in different ways, understandably. But remember, the primary sin is the rejection of God. So that puts us all on a kind of equal footing. And this is not to deny that there are systemic injustices. And so I know this is partial, but it's the core, I think, is recognizing that none of us are really entitled to anything, in a sense, but that God graces us with things. And as Christians, we need to be leading the way in teaching people to live by grace, not by entitlement, but by grace and responsibility for others. It's the pass the salt around the table mentality, right? This is this idea of modeling the kingdom of God in the midst of this. The solution is not me trying to attain the power that you have, right? Like, I'm entitled to this power. I want more of that power. But actually, we follow Christ, who gave up his divine position to come. He emptied himself and he came and sacrificed himself in the supreme act of grace. That is the primary reality that we live under. And what it means is it means forgiveness. It means blessing people in a way that's due to them in the light of what God has done for them, not what they're entitled, but how they're regarded by God. The reality then of what God has done in Christ just kind of resets the whole situation. So it's not about me trying to get recognition and me taking the moral high ground or me trying to get more of that power. And it's not denying, again, because empowerment and recognition and agency and all of these things are vital. But we need to model a situation in which these things are given, not taken, and actually seed a world in which justice becomes something that flows from the hearts of people. And it's not just about correcting systems. It is that as well, but it's got to start with renewed hearts of people living by grace, flowing from that and correcting systems of injustice. But I think just dealing with this in terms of the struggle between groups and trying to win the game of the power struggle is not the answer. In fact, what did Jesus do? He lost the game. But through that, this is this act of God's grace that I think puts us all on the same footing. And it's not denying that we need to be prepared to act graciously to those who have less power and to give power. It's living a lifestyle that gives power and gives more agency and gives grace. It's not about what you deserve. This is mine and this is yours. We've got to get beyond all of that and learn to actually live out the good news of the gospel, which is primarily about grace.
Listeners, we started this episode by saying justice is a complex conversation. And you might be leaving thinking, so what was that all about? In part 2, we're going to slow down and get practical, asking, what does a distinctly Christian response to our culture's justice issues actually look like when we see them through God's design and order for our lives? So please do join us for the next episode of Thrive Perspectives.